Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and you can catch up with me on X or Twitter at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you sign up, you get a weekly bonus episode of all the other stuff I'm watching. So I just kind of give my opinion on the things that I'm watching right now, watching things like House of the Dragon, just saw the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, things like that. So we have fun on there if you want to check that out. And I have a returning guest I've had on a few times. I have John Rodgers. Say hi, John.
Hello, John.
Hello.
Excuse me. Sorry. Here we go. Clearing the throat
worries.
here.
No worries. Go ahead.
Say hello. I'm glad to be back here again. We always have fun. I love talking about movies, and sometimes I get so carried away, you have to tell me to shut up.
Well, I've never said that. I enjoy talking about movies as well, so I look forward to having you on. You've been on the show several times. We've talked about a lot of great classic films, but what do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Just tell the audience about yourself.
Yes, if you keep up with the I Love That Movie Facebook page, I'm the fella that used to write about Turner Classic Movies every week, do some picks of the week, and but we've recently cut the cable, so I don't have Turner Classic Movies anymore. So I gave that. Plus, that column was getting rather repetitive. In fact, so much so that I was copying and pasting off of earlier columns on that. So I quit that. But yeah, I'm a retired school teacher. I still dabble in community theater, and and am enjoying retirement.
Well, that's really nice. I love hearing about your the plays that you're in. I've attended one before and hope to do so in the future. I think you're a great actor, and it just brings a different I guess vibe to the show when we talk about it, because you've had some experience with it. But like you said, you love classic film. And my guest always picks the movie. If you're listening for the first time, my guests are the ones that choose the movie. So, John, what movie did you choose to talk about today?
I chose The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, starring Paul Newman, directed by John Huston. And I must say, it kind of doesn't fit into your format because I don't truly love this movie. However, I do find it quite fascinating for several reasons that we'll get into.
Okay. I was curious about that. I noticed, this was my first time watching it, and I noticed that takes on it kind of swing wildly one way or the other. It seems like a lot of people have opinions on it, but some are good, some are bad, some are somewhere in between. So I'm kind of excited to talk about that. I will warn our listeners that I will not do a spoiler-free and then spoiler-filled portion. So if you're still with us, you should go and watch this movie first and then come back. But if not, here's the summary of the film. Saved from near death by a young Mexican girl, a former outlaw sets himself up as the sole arbiter of law in a small town. The town prospers as Judge Bean robs and hangs anyone with money that comes through it. But his haven becomes less secure when his Mexican companion dies and the townsfolk begin to turn against him. So, John, when did you first see this movie?
Actually, it was just within the last couple of years. The movie came
Oh,
out,
really?
I'm thinking 73. I was
Yeah,
aware of
yeah.
it. I was aware of it back then. I remember reading the great film critic, and I tried to find this review, and I cannot find it. The great film critic, Philip Wunsch, who wrote for many years for the Dallas Morning News. I used to read him all the time. In fact, my little Turner Classic Movies column was patterned after a column he would do every week about the good movies that were on TV
Mm.
on any given week, and I kind of was imitating him with that. And I remember reading his review. I like westerns, but I just never got around to this one. And it popped up on, hey, guess what? Turner Classic Movies. I think last summer, summer before last, and watched it. And I'm like, what in the world is going on here? And
Yeah.
because it doesn't play like normal westerns, it's really a mixed bag.
Yeah, it's a bit goofy, I would say, but like and zany and fun. Well, I'll read a little bit from John Huston, who directed the film. He said he acknowledged the film's lack of success in his autobiography, An Open Book, writing that it was not exactly a failure, but you could hardly call it a roaring success. It just didn't take off, as they say. Still, there were some very good things in it. Houston felt that the story was in the fine old American tradition of the tall tale, the whopper, the yarn, people with outrageous characters capable of prodigious and highly improbable deeds. At the same time, it said something important about frontier life and the loss of America's innocence. Houston owned up to the scattershot nature of the storytelling and wrote, "To heighten the effect, I made deliberate use of a technique that has since become more popular, letting all sorts of events occur without logical justification. Things appear, things happen, funny, sad, comic, dramatic, ludicrous one moment, and sober the next." So, kind of like you said, a little all over the place.
Yes, indeed. And got to look at where it was in the John Huston canon. Now,
Okay.
legendary director. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
worked with Bogart, did the Maltese Falcon, did
Oh, I love that movie.
yeah, the Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
I saw
Uh,
that in theaters. I mean, obviously not when it came out, but I've
right,
seen it in theaters.
and me either. And the classic version of Moby Dick with Gregory Peck, that was his,
Wow.
and he was legendary at the African Queen again with Bogart. And
Oh,
but
that's a
by the
great one too.
time the 70s, he was getting really experimental, and
Mm.
and because he did this, he did Wise Blood. Um,
Chinatown, right?
he was in it. Polanski directed
Oh,
that,
that's right. That was Polanski. Sorry. Thank you.
but he was in, and he worked with Orson Welles on what became Orson Welles' last movie that finally got released on Netflix like last year, year before last, The Other Side of the Wind.
Hmm.
He played the Orson Welles like character in that. Uh, Fairly decent actor. Had this commanding voice. There's a wonderful movie called White Hunter, Black Heart, starring Clint Eastwood, where Clint
Mm.
Eastwood essentially plays John Huston when they were filming The African Queen. Uh,
Oh.
but then later in his career, he got really experimental, and one of his late films was the musical Annie, of all things, and
Oh, okay.
and but also this movie it owes he like borrowed elements from other I don't know if it was him or the studio or the editors afterwards, but it story wise it plays a lot like the movie version of MASH, very episodic, and the pieces don't always fit together. You're doing this one thing and then the next scene comes and it's almost like a bunch of short stories. And because Paul Newman had had great success with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which I'd love to talk about with you someday, um, they even sort of stole a scene from that where Judge Roy Bean, based on a historical character, about the only thing that this movie has in common with the character is the name. But Judge Roy Bean and his woman that became his sweetheart, the young Mexican girl who saved his life, as you mentioned, go on a picnic, and they put this. sweet song with it, much like the Paul Newman, Catherine Ross scene and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And when we'll save that for when we talk about Butch, but I didn't like that scene originally in Butch, but now I love it. But this one, the molasses, marmalade, and honey, I believe is the name of the song. It's just a pale imitation, in my opinion. Uh, so yeah, we got the episodic nature of MASH. We've got the song inserted for no apparent reason. We've got bloody violence. There's a very big shootout at the beginning of the movie, and you don't see anybody bleed. But however, later on in the movie, you do see someone bleed. And you got to remember, this is right after the Wild Bunch and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid peck and paw thing. So a little bit of imitation of that going on.
Yeah, like,
John,
is it a little bit of parody in some ways, or what do you
yeah,
think? Yeah. That's kind of the vibe I got, is like, this is like, people, I guess, like, figures like this in these Westerns are, I mean, like, I guess kind of like what superhero films are today, like, they're just really, really big figures that nobody can really live up to. They're like they're like hyper masculine, and, he's got like all those kind of traits of things that are kind of impossible for him to be all those things at once. But that's kind of how I saw it. Anyway, I interrupted your flow.
oh
Sorry. Go
no,
ahead.
that's okay. That's okay. Um, Victoria Principal, I believe this was her first role, and it was several years before Dallas, about 6 years, I think, before Dallas
Oh,
premiered.
interesting.
And she just stunning, and just she's not Pam Ewing wore a lot of makeup and had. She's just this plain, simple peasant girl who's just got this inner beauty, and it shines through her. And when she uh, models her Sears and Roebuck dress, it's like, whoa, just freeze frame it like right there and enjoy that moment, because she is just so beautiful in that, and plays the role with a real simplicity, while Newman is rather over the top. And of course, also in support, you've got Ned Beatty, who is as solid an actor as we ever had, uh, playing sort of his sidekick. Uh, Tector Kreitz, I believe his name, wound up being the bartender there at the Jersey Lily, which was the saloon that Roy Bean owned. And that's another thing that is more or less historically accurate. The
Oh.
building that they use for that looks like there's old pictures of the real
Mm.
Jersey Lily. You mentioned in the summary that he hanged several people, and the real
Yeah.
Roy Bean was known as a hanging judge, but supposedly, in my research, he only actually hanged sentenced three guys to hang, and I think one of them got out of it by painting his house.
Yeah, that's what I
So
read too, that like he didn't really do that.
right.
Like, but that's interesting. I wonder, do you know if he really had a pet bear?
No, oh, and that's another person from history that's in it. Grizzly Adams was a real guy, and that's the character that John Huston plays in what's basically an extended cameo, and he leaves this bear there with Roy Bean and it becomes his pet. But Grizzly Adams lived in the 1860s, and this story is set at a right around the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, because the ending of it is well into the like the well, they mentioned prohibition, so that'd be the 20s, 1920s. So uh, I don't think Roy Bean had a pet bear. If he did, he certainly didn't acquire it from the real Grizzly Adams. Interesting thing about that, John Milius, I might have mentioned before, wrote the script, and he wanted to direct it himself, and he wanted to do essentially a spaghetti western, and actually wanted to go over to Spain and use uh, the spaghetti western sets that were there and do it on the cheap. And the studio didn't think he had enough experience. And here we got John Huston, who is this classic director, and put him on this project. And that's when it started changing directions. John Milius supposedly butted heads with Huston a lot, that Huston wasn't filming this thing the way he had envisioned it when he wrote it, and was changing things and all that. Huston claims that they got along very well, while Milius is a little more reserved about how well they got along. Um, but
Yeah, I honestly can see that, because I do think, like you said, this movie is more experimental. It is kind of wacky. It's over the top. I mean, like when you look up the genre, it's more of like a comedy western, and I think you can tell that that wasn't the original intent when you watch it. So I can imagine the writer being frustrated. And I did read that like he went on to like want to direct because then he would have control over what he created. And
indeed.
that I can understand that. Even if you enjoy the movie and really like it, you can kind of understand like that's got to be frustrating. I'm sure that happens all the time though.
Yes, and in the Grizzly Adams scene, uh, Adams mentions another mountain man named Johnson. Milius, it could have been his next movie, wrote and maybe directed Jeremiah Johnson, in which the character Grizzly Adam also appears. He's played by Will Geer in that one, and I think that was more the type of movie he wanted this one to be. Jeremiah
Mm.
Johnson, he wanted it to be, wanted Roy Bean to be more like that, and it wasn't. Uh, so
What do you think
too many
about, or go
cooks.
ahead. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Too many cooks spoil the broth.
Yeah. What do you think about, I read too that like some people, maybe even the writer, didn't really like the idea of Paul Newman being the same character, that he was like too good looking and I think he said like too cute. What do you think of
Indeed.
that?
Yes. Well, he wanted Lee Marvin. Well, actually, Milius wanted Warren Oates,
Mm.
and I don't know what happened there, but the script got presented to Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin and Newman were working on a movie together. Uh, Marvin never got around to looking at it. Apparently, Newman found it laying around, and read it and got excited about it. And Newman claims that this is one of his favorite roles. And when you consider all the things Paul Newman did,
I know,
uh,
that's amazing to hear.
yes.
Young people think of him as the guy in the salad dressing now, but um I thought that was interesting too. Like to me, Paul Newman is like generous, because his like salad dressing stuff. I mean that was like nonprofit
Hmm.
stuff, right? Like very,
Right.
so that's how I think of him. But it's interesting because I read that like I think it was Ava Gardner like did not like him. I thought he was like full of
Yes.
himself and annoying. And I was like, oh, interesting. So, it's like over time how I think of him is so different from how he probably his peers did.
Yes. And I wonder how they got that, because they do not share a scene in this movie.
Yeah. They don't.
So I don't know if he's had some kind of producer credit. Sorry, I haven't read the credits that closely, and was perhaps supervising her scenes or what. But their scene is her scene is not with him. Not
Yeah.
to
I thought
spoil
that
anything, but
too.
she plays Lily Langtry, who is one of the few other actual historical figures. And she was a very
Mm.
famous actress in the 19th century. And the way this story goes, uh, uh, Roy Bean was obsessed with her, had posters of her all over the inside of his saloon. He named the saloon the Jersey Lily. And uh, uh,
Interesting.
and and then at the very end of the movie, she arrives there to see what all the fuss was about. And
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know. You're right. They don't share a scene, but maybe they knew each other outside of that. You talked earlier about how, that his love interest, I guess the only Italian thing, the only spaghetti western thing about this is her, probably Victoria Principal, because she is Italian, not Hispanic. Which I feel like happened a lot back then. They were like, oh, this is close enough,
right.
I will say I think she is gorgeous and I think she does a wonderful job. I will say her Mexican accent is not very convincing. Just as a Mexican person, I'm like, that's the only part. I'm like, that's terrible. But I think she does a good job.
Yes,
and it
she
was the
does.
times.
Again, her performance is very understated
It
compared
is.
to everybody else who's over the top. And the most over the top is Stacy Keach, who is a
Hmm.
fine actor. I actually got to play a role that he had played on stage a few years ago, and so I looked at a lot of him video of him doing that role, and
Uh-huh.
he can be a very subtle actor, but he plays this outlaw called Bad Bob the Albino.
That part reminded me of like Mad Max or something. I was like, what is happening here? That was so interesting.
He's dressed all in black. He looks the costume looks like something out of an old Roy Rogers type of thing, uh,
Yeah.
two gun holster rig. He's got this long white hair wig. His skin has been painted because he's supposed to be an albino. Got this ridiculous hat, and everybody else is dressed more or less the way people naturally dressed or
Yeah,
in the
more
19th
like
century.
historically accurate.
And he
Yeah.
looks totally like a cartoon, and his demise is very cartoonish.
Yes.
And ever have you ever seen a movie called The Quick and the Dead with Sharon Stone and
I have not.
uh, yeah, okay, uh, the bit where can I tell that you can cut this out if you don't want to give it away.
No, that's fine.
Bad Bob gets shot, and you see the hole, you see the light shining through this hole, and it's a technique that was used later on in The Quick and the Dead with Gene Hackman and Sharon Stone and Leo DiCaprio. That's a fun guilty pleasure movie. It's also a very unrealistic western. Uh,
Yeah, you don't have to worry about spoilers on this show. We don't
okay.
worry about that. We assume you saw it. But yeah, I thought that part was funny. But in a movie where, somebody has a pet bear, I mean, I didn't find it that unrealistic. So
Right, and you got to realize too,
the
this is
pet drinking bear too.
within a year or so of when Mel Brooks did Blazing Saddles, which
Oh, I hadn't thought about
really
that
took
connection.
things very satirical. So
Yeah.
if this movie is supposed to be satirical, it kind of falls short.
I understand. I do feel like there's humor to it, but it's not as subversive. It's not as intentionally like written that way. I think it's a mix. Can we talk a little bit about Anthony Perkins? I was kind of
I
surprised to
was
see
just
him.
thinking of that.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Well, another technique that they use, first time we see Anthony Perkins' character, he's talking directly to the camera. And this was
Yes, breaking the fourth
40
wall, very
40 years
Deadpool-like.
before Deadpool,
Yes.
50 years before Deadpool. Um, and Tab Hunter, just a little bit later, in his little bit, you see, when you first see him, he's talking directly to the camera. And I think those are the only two characters I actually did that with. You do hear voiceover narration from Ned Beatty late in the film,
Mhm.
but that was rather strange. And the words that they're saying are words that sound like they would normally be a voiceover narration. The first time
Yes.
I saw Roy Bean, he was blah blah all this, and but Anthony Perkins looking straight at us when he says it, and and those guys, and you mentioned supporting actors. There's several of them that just come in, do one scene, and then they're gone.
Yeah, it feels very like, I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, it's like they do one little character and then they leave, and it's I don't know. It was interesting. It like you said, it feels a little ahead of its time. Like a lot of fourth wall breaking.
Yes, but can we talk about the music?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay, the music is lovely, except for that silly song. I did not like the song at all. But the music is, and usually on a Western, on the opening credits, you get some kind of big, lots of strings, lots of brass, almost a military march kind of sound. Think of John Wayne movies and stuff like this. And this one, you get a very subtle waltz in a minor key.
Mm,
And it's by Maurice Jarre, Jarre. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce the gentleman's name.
uh-huh.
And it's beautiful, so beautiful that just a few years ago, a fellow named Quentin Tarantino borrowed that music for the very last scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and that last scene where Leo DiCaprio's character is walking up to Sharon Stone's house, that's the music you hear, and it's a very otherworldly sounding thing. That's what, which leads to the on-screen thing that says "Once Upon a Time," and so yeah, right off the bat, you get not normal Western stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It's different. It's more like fantasy almost, or like pulpy a little bit. Like maybe what like a young boy would think of as like a really cool Western story. You know, there's bears, there's guns, there's Bad Bob, like just a bunch of like fun stuff.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you know how you when you dream, none of the scenes fit together, but
Yeah,
feel very. It's
yeah.
almost like that. The music is very dreamlike, and
Hmm.
the movie itself is sort of dreamlike. Again, I don't particularly love it. I do like to watch it again, just for the look
Yeah,
and uh, and the actors. They do a fine job, even though even when they're doing over the top, they're all doing over the top.
yeah,
Stacy
yeah.
Keach was more over the top than anybody, but like the little at the end, he was the train station guy that walks Miss Lily
Oh,
through the
okay.
yeah, you know he walks like a cartoon. He looks like looks like he walked out of a Looney Tune. Uh,
Yeah. Speaking of Looney Tune, doesn't isn't one of like Yosemite Sam's like lines something that's said in this movie, I think I read?
oh
Let me
yeah,
find it again. Oh yeah, go for it.
Roy Bean in real life, the historical one, he had a sign on the front of the Jersey Lily Saloon proclaiming him the law west of the Pecos.
Yes,
And
West of the Pecos.
when Yosemite Sam would introduce himself in Bugs Bunny cartoons, he was, I'm Yosemite Sam, and I'm the meanest, rootin', tootin', darndest west of the Pecos.
Man, that's a really good impression. I
What
love that.
impression?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh man. I miss Mel Blanc. He was such a good gifted voice actor.
okay, we'll have to do a special episode sometime where I will tell the story of when I had dinner with Mel Blanc.
What? Yeah, I definitely have to hear about that sometime.
Yes, we'll make it a well. Let's talk about Looney Tunes sometime, and I can tell that story.
Yeah.
I can make that story 5 minutes. I can make it a half an hour.
Isn't there like a Looney Tune Casablanca movie? I remember that from a long
Carrot
time ago.
Blanca.
Carrot
Yeah,
Blanca. Yeah, we could
that's
talk about
sort
that.
of when a few years ago when Warner Brothers kind of got the animation department cranked up again, and that's
Yeah.
one of the first things they did.
Ah, I remember that. I liked it. And I have so many fond memories of like going to the Warner Brothers store. Oh, I love tangents.
Oh, I do too.
Oh, but also, so is part of why you picked this movie just, you know, being a Texan and loving to talk about Texas as well? Because
Oh,
I I noticed that the bear was drinking Pearl beer,
yes.
so from San Antonio, the Pearl Brewery. If people haven't heard of that, but which is now
Yeah,
a
I don't
really
think
fancy
Pearl Beer is
hotel.
still around.
Yeah, I don't think so. But the hotel, there's the Pearl District, like in San Antonio, and the old brewery is like a really fancy, expensive hotel now. But you can still go in there, and you can read all the different plaques. And actually, like um, the wife of the guy that started the Pearl Brewery, she was like she was real business savvy and
Mm.
made a ton of money. It's real interesting story if you go in there and read about it. But yeah, so that you can still see that. But yeah, anyway, is it also your love of Texas that draws you to this
Oh,
movie?
yes. I love Texas history. One of my good friends, Eddie Henry, was a Texas history teacher. We worked
Oh,
together at a school. And sometimes when I see a film representing Texas history, I'll message Eddie. I say, "Are you watching?" There was some kind of Texas history miniseries a few
mhm.
years ago, and I knew he was watching. I'm like, Eddie, how close is this coming to being right? And he's usually like, not very. Uh,
It almost never
and
is, huh?
and that's certainly the case with this film. Uh, where Roy Bean lived didn't turn into an oil boom town, and certainly wasn't destroyed in the manner in which um, Armageddon comes to the end of this movie. But
Yeah.
oh, it's also one of the first times we saw. Help me out here. The lady that played his daughter,
Oh, let me pull that up.
Jacqueline Bisset.
Oh, yep, yeah. I thought she did a really good job, and I liked that little through line of like he had a daughter and she kind of turned out like him, and
Yeah,
she didn't resent him. She just thought of him as a hero and kind of modeled herself after him. And then, he shows back up to kind of save the day at the end. I mean, I'm kind of with the townsfolk, honestly, though. Like, he hangs too many people. Like, I get why they were
right.
like, maybe we shouldn't be hanging everyone. But, anyways, he comes back and kind of saves the day at the end. And yeah, I thought she did a good job.
Yes, she did. And did you read Roger Ebert's review of this movie?
I did. He was not crazy about it, it
No, he
seems.
wasn't. But he said, of course, of course, if Paul Newman and Victoria Principal were to have a child, she would grow up to look like Jacqueline Bisset. Two of the most beautiful people on screen, and they, of course,
Yeah.
produce a very beautiful daughter.
Yes, that's true.
Did you see the little trivia bit about Michael Sarrazin? It says participation by Michael Sarrazin.
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
Okay. Uh, he doesn't actually appear in the movie, but when uh, 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 Ned Beatty's character tells how she married a World War One pilot who had made an emergency landing in front of the saloon, he shows a picture of Rose, the daughter, and her beau, uh, and that picture was Michael Sarrazin.
Oh,
Sarrazin and Bissett were dating at the time, and
I
so
see.
there you go. And so he got a screen credit for basically posing for a still photograph.
Wow, but yeah, I guess they still need to name him. He should still get proper credit if his likeness is being used, so that's understandable.
Yeah, the bear was known as Bruno the Bear,
Uh-huh.
and if you grew up in the late '60s, there was a television show starring Ron Howard's little brother called Gentle Ben. It's that same bear that
Oh,
was in that show. Um,
interesting. There used to be
Roddy
so many
McDowell.
animal actors, but, it's
Yeah.
less and less these days.
Roddy McDowell, we didn't mention him.
Oh, yeah.
Every Western's got to have a bad guy.
Mhm.
And he is not your conventional Western bad guy by any
Yeah.
means. He doesn't come and rob the town at the point of a gun. He kind of like in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, he comes to change the West with a book of law.
Yeah.
And but his motives are a lot less pure than Jimmy Stewart's were in Liberty Valance,
Mhm.
and he plays it to the hilt.
Yeah.
And you
It's also a little over the top, like, as that guy too, a little mustache twirly, but still fun.
right, a lot of fun, and you want to cheer when he gets his comeuppance at the
Yeah.
end.
Well, I feel
Some
like
really neat.
that's a theme that is explored in some westerns is, taming the West and like how, that's always happening. It's like, oh no, the time of this lawlessness and fun times, it's almost over. I think they say that in the movie.
Yeah,
Except they say when women started voting, things went bad or whatever. I guess
right.
the way
Things
they
went to hell, I think is what
yeah.
it. And there are several movies with that theme. The Wild Bunch. Go
Mhm.
take Peckinpah all the way back to Ride the High Country. Uh, Butch and Sundance. Even they had to
Yeah.
leave the American West because their way of life wouldn't fly here anymore, and they go to Bolivia. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. I like Peckinpah. Uh, it's all about uh, the 20th century coming in and things changing and law and order becoming uh, more accepted. And
Yeah. I feel like that's where, to me, I always see such a big connection with, how Akira Kurosawa's films were so influenced by westerns, and then westerns end up being influenced by his films. That's
Oh yeah.
also a big theme, right? In a lot of samurai movies is that the way of the samurai is going away. It's, life is changing, and it's just a very popular theme.
Yes, indeed, and that would be another fun one to do is Akira Kurosawa movies and
Mhm.
the American Western and the spaghetti westerns
Yeah.
that fed off of each other,
Yeah.
and Tarantino.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tarantino used a sampling from this movie. I think in which movie was it? The Hollywood one. What was it called?
Once Upon a
Man.
Time in Hollywood.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the music at the
Yeah.
very end
Hmm.
uh, came from uh, Judge Roy Bean.
Yeah.
Again, it's beautiful,
Hmm.
beautiful. Again, otherworldly. It's like this is a dream. Just like
Hmm.
it turns out that you've seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood,
I
right?
have. Yes. Sorry.
Okay. So when you get to the end, and I saw it at the movie house, I think the weekend it came out, and got to the end, and I thought, he did it to us again. He did it to us in Inglorious Bastards, and he
Hmm.
did it to us again. If you
Yeah.
know history and are expecting certain things to happen, they don't. And then you get this dreamlike music, and it says,
Yeah.
Once
That's a good
Upon a
through line.
Time.
Yeah.
uh,
That's a good through line. Like, I hadn't thought of that. Like the dreamy nature of this and that movie, and then the connection. That's pretty cool.
yeah, that's what I did as a school teacher. We picked apart themes and
Oh, that's so fun.
allusions.
I love that. I love that. That's like my favorite thing to do. That's why we have this show.
Yeah.
Um, what else are there other elements of the movie or scenes you wanted to talk about?
Real quick, the photography.
Hmm.
Um, there's some beautiful shots in this thing. As much as I don't like the marmalade, molasses, and honey song picnic sequence, it's beautifully shot.
Yeah.
There's a scene near the end when the aged Roy Bean comes back and he's silhouetted against the setting sun. Again, that's very symbolic.
Yeah.
And his daughter sees him for the first time, and is if you know anything about photography, you know those are hard shots to get right.
Mm.
And I'm not sure who the director of photography was on this, but did a fine job. And the scenery, I believe this was actually shot in Arizona, but it's so flat and uh, brown that it
Hmm.
could be West Texas.
Yeah, I thought it looked like West Texas. Oh, and by the way, the cinematographer, director of photography was Richard Moore.
Sorry, don't know his work. I'm sure. Well, give me something to look up later.
Yeah, it looks like he did Annie also.
Mm,
But when I'm looking through, I'm not seeing a ton of stuff I know right off the bat. So
right.
yeah,
But yeah, but he did. There's a lot of pretty pictures in this thing. The way
yeah.
he photographs a Victoria Principal, like I said, the
Hmm.
first time she wears that lovely dress that he bought her from Sears and Roebuck, it's like, whoa, I mean, perfectly lit. She's perfect. One of the few times in the movie that she seems made up, but
Hmm.
they did just the right amount. She doesn't look overly made up.
Yeah, because older films, especially like the 70s and before, like a lot of times when they dress them up, they just look like someone from the 70s. I mean, I
Mhm.
think that happens now too. So it's kind of cool when they don't like over the top do the makeup of the era because it adds to the authenticity a little bit.
Indeed, it does. And supporting cast, the guys that played as deputies, you've seen them in other things. We already mentioned Ned Beatty. I cannot remember. Same year, one of the other deputies and Ned Beatty were in Deliverance together.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
I cannot remember that guy's name, but that's okay. Uh, Matt Clark, who's been in a gazillion things, as one of the deputies. really strong supporting actors in the minor roles.
Hmm.
Steve Canale is one of the deputies, and then 6 years later, he and Victoria Principal worked together on Dallas.
Oh, interesting. I think it's funny, like, whenever I would go to Europe, this was a while back, probably around a decade ago, but when I was over there, people would always bring up Dallas, like, if they knew I was from Texas, or like, "Oh, like the show Dallas," as if we're all still watching Dallas all the time. I just always thought that was funny.
Yes, I've never been to Europe, but I've been to New York once, and people would spot my accent right off. And you're not from around here, are you?
You're
and,
like, no, definitely not."
and they'd ask, can you ride horses? Well, actually, yeah, I can, but it's not what we do.
Yeah. I've kind of always wanted to I didn't really get into westerns until later because I think I thought of them growing up as like, "Oh, that's like what my dad watches,"
There you
like
go. Well, you see,
because
I'm your dad's age, so
yeah. And what's interesting though is that that's also so true because for a while there weren't a lot of westerns. And
yeah,
it's still not to the level of it was before. I feel like honestly after Star Wars came out, things started going that direction a little bit. I mean,
which
it's
is
like
essentially a Western set in space.
exactly. And so like when we revisit those themes, they're often sci-fi.
Oh yeah,
But I've grown an affinity for them, and so much so that a few years ago I was even looking into we were going to Vegas, and I saw that you there was a experience you could do where you go through like Red Rock Canyon on a horse, and then you have like a cowboy breakfast at the end. And I was like very tempted to try that, but I'm a little scared of riding horses, I won't lie. I'm a little nervous about it.
not the most comfortable way to travel.
Yeah, for sure, and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm doing, hopefully it's a very mild-mannered horse that can put up with
Yeah,
me,
well, I
but
have a feeling on a deal like that, though, all you got to do is not fall off. The horse is going to know what to do.
yeah, they know
Kind of
where they're
like
going.
when I worked at a certain dinner theater thing in Dallas. Uh, my horse knew the show as well as I did.
I think I know what you're talking about.
I think you do.
Um, but back to the film, is there anything else that we haven't explored or that you wanted to chat through?
I can't really tell what you said about Western. This thing, and then they went out of favor or weren't getting produced for it. This was
Yeah.
one of the last of that cycle. There was
Oh.
a bunch of westerns in the 20s. Well, in fact, the first movie that ever told a story was The Great Train Robbery, way
Mhm.
back in the silent days. And I watch a lot of Me TV now because of our television situation where I live. And the you talked about growing up, the westerns were what your dad watched. Well, he watched all those Gunsmoke, Bonanza, The
Yeah, they were
Rifleman.
huge. Yeah,
Yeah, and
not
those
just
things are
movies, but
sticking.
shows. Yeah.
And that was all over the TV in the 50s and going into the
Mhm.
60s, and then it started trailing off. And but it was in the early 60s that westerns, big screen westerns, started taking. Well, actually, in the 50s, some of the James Stewart westerns
Mhm.
started taking a turn. It wasn't so much good guy, bad guy stuff. It was a lot of ambivalence in there. And then you got the spaghetti westerns, and then you got
Oh.
Sam Peckinpah doing what he did with the Wild Bunch and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Uh, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, again, a movie I do truly love. Uh, but by the early 70s, this was starting to fade out. And that's where this movie fits in. It was trying to be what MASH was to war movies.
Mhm.
Uh, it didn't go as far with satire as Blazing Saddles did right about that same time. So John Huston talked about how it didn't really go over.
Yeah.
It was bad timing. If he'd made this movie in the 60s, it might have been a
Yeah.
bigger deal. Who knows?
Yeah, that's a good point. I love the movie MASH, but it's so if people listening haven't seen it, it's so incredibly different from the show.
Oh yeah.
It's more satirical. It's more, a very negative. stance, obviously, on war, and very jaded. I don't know. If you see it, it's good. It's really
Yeah.
good though. But it's interesting. It's different. So yeah,
Um,
that makes sense. I can kind of see that parallel.
I was talking to a friend earlier today, telling him I was going to be doing this with you tonight,
Yeah.
and he asked what movie, and I told him, and he said, "You know, I thought that movie was directed by Robert Altman at first because of
Oh wow.
that style." So maybe Houston was seeing what the younger directors were doing and wanted to get in on that a little bit himself, but
Mm.
who knows?
Yeah, I could totally see that.
Well, that's about all I can think of
Okay.
about it.
Okay. Well, that brings me to my last couple of questions for you then. The first one being, if you had to summarize, what do you, we don't have to say love if you didn't love it, but what do you like about this film?
I like the look.
Hmm.
I like the work of supporting actors because I feel a kinship to them.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, I like the music, except for the silly song. Uh, yeah, it sounds like it's a well put together movie, but at the same time, it doesn't hold together to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. How would you pitch it to somebody though?
Well, if you want to see the salad dressing guy in a totally different way,
Yeah, that's true.
if you want to see Victoria Principal when she was the most beautiful before she started being totally manufactured by the
Mm.
makeup and hairstylists on Dallas and et cetera.
Yeah,
Uh,
that fits the vibe of Dallas though, because I feel like we still have that
oh,
reputation.
sure, yeah. I mean, Dallas was a product of its time as well.
Hmm.
If you want to see some really fine characters, supporting actors like Ned Beatty, who is one of my favorite actors of all time, uh, uh, if you get into the craft of acting, he just does a wonderfully fine job playing Tector Kreitz. He started off being one of Bean's deputies and then became the manager, I guess it is, of the saloon that Bean
Mm.
established.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you again, John. And we'll talk again soon.
And indeed, we will.